We are live. All right. Hello, Chad. How are you?
I'm good.
Let's
Thank
pretend
you.
like let's pretend like we haven't been talking for the past 5 minutes.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm. It is a lovely cold day in San Francisco.
Oh, is it? Yeah, I get a little jealous being here in Texas. See you guys. I'll see pictures on Twitter or anything, and everybody's got. Or we'll get on meetings and people have hoodies on. I'm like, it's
Yeah,
110 out here, so I get a little jealous.
yeah.
But
I think we're literally half. I think today is just over 60. So,
yeah. Another quick side note, and it's amazing to me. No people in San Francisco don't have ACs. When you had the
yeah,
heat wave, I traveled there, and they're like, "We don't have AC in the hotel room. So sorry." Yeah, it's foreign to me from being a Texan.
yeah.
100%. Well, cool,
It's.
man.
I mean, all the houses here are 100 years old. So
Yeah,
and they're all made of wood. So
right.
it's just a kind of.
Well, cool. Well, this is our hello, everybody. Glad folks are joining. We didn't really publish this much out there, so I'm sure people will come on. But yeah, last week was our first time. Had some technical difficulties. Things seem to be running smooth now. But yeah, if you're out there on the internets, welcome. We're gonna talk about ACI and Azure today. When did we announce that? Around DockerCon, correct?
Yeah, it was DockerCon.
Yeah, I
Uh,
got a little, for at least for me, swept up in the DockerCon storm. Just so many things going on then. But yeah, I just wrote a blog post Monday. Man, I really enjoyed it. It was smooth. It was easy to use. And it's not even, it's still in beta, right?
Yeah, it's still in really early beta. And so for folks that don't know, um, yeah, at DockerCon we announced it, and I forget when the beta shipped. It shipped a couple weeks later, but it's a way to use Docker Run and Docker Compose with Azure ACI. And so if you haven't heard of ACI, it's the Azure Container Interface, and it's a container runtime service, and so you can give it a container and it'll run it for you. It's really kind of centered around single container. Notionally, effectively, a very similar idea to pod, which typically you might have one container in that pod, and
Sorry.
then oh no,
Go ahead, Chad. I'm sorry. That
that's fine.
that was
Yeah,
me.
you'd have
That was me pulling up and getting some echo. Sorry.
we're good.
I totally threw you off.
Get
I'm sorry.
the pod. I'm fine. You got a pod, kind of Notion. It's not the same. It's not 100% the same, but it's very similar. And so typically it's one container and maybe some sidecars or something else.
Right.
But we did the work to make Docker Run and Docker Compose work, because the way that you launch into ACI, you either use the Azure CLI or you write these other piles of YAML, and you have to learn something new. And so we have talked to a lot of folks around. It'd be great if I could go to these places, but I would just keep using the same tools that I already know. And so that was really the goal. And so yeah, it's pretty new. Still got some rough edges as we work it out. But I definitely encourage folks to go look at it. The way you would get it is to go get the latest Docker Desktop Edge version for either Mac or Windows. If you're on Linux, it's a little more complicated. Not actually 100%.
I think. I think I might have lost you. Oh no. Uh-oh. Chad, I think I might have lost you. But I think are you back? You're back. Hello.
Oh, I'm back. Did I go away?
Yeah, just a little hiccup, little glitch in the matrix there for a second. But you were talking about Linux, getting ACI working on Linux.
Yeah, so I think right now for ACI you can't do, you can only use the one, you can only use Mac or Windows because you need Docker Desktop. Um, there's some under the covers magic for why that is, and it's basically it's an experimental and it's difficult to install, so we just took care of that in the experience. But yeah, so that shipped in beta, and we have a update coming with we've been working on feedback from folks and lots of echo. Let's see.
I'm good over here. But yeah, while you mess around with that, I'll fill the awkward silence. But but yeah, like I said, I was playing with it. I kind of waited a little bit when it first got not announced, but internally, right? I started playing around with it. But then I decided, I'm going to wait till it gets a little bit baked, a little bit better. And yeah, I was really impressed with just the ease of being able to switch my context into ACI, doing a Docker Compose up, Docker Compose down, even just Docker running a single image in ACI. Was super simple. Back before I came to Docker, I was working at a custom development shop, and that it just would have been great to be able to use that for our clients, to be able to even update their production systems, their stage systems, or even just when you're developing a feature and want to deploy it very quickly to share with a PM or something, or your team. Makes it extremely easy just to switch your context and do a Docker run your image right in ACI. And it's only going to get better from there. The integration, we're working closely with Microsoft. They're excited about it. We are super excited about it. But yeah, I think it might be cool to jump in to do some demos or.
Yeah. Hopefully the echo is gone, folks.
Yeah, you sound fine on my side. So you want me to? I'm going to switch over and let you share.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
So let me. So somebody asked, is this a replacement for Kubernetes? I don't think it's a replacement. I think what it is it's an extension of using the tools you already use. So if you use if you use Compose and you use Docker, you can continue to do that. You just don't have to worry about in a cloud environment where you want to run it. Also, these are betas, so I would not recommend right now doing production workloads in this. So I think it really depends on what problems you're trying to solve. But yeah, I don't think it's a replacement. I think it's just a different more developer side focus. So if you already use Compose, or if you like Compose, or if what you're doing fits very well into Compose, so like A talks to B, B talks to C, if you need lots of knobs and whistles to tweak and turn about auto scaling and all of those pieces, like that's probably another reason to use something like Kubernetes if you need lots and lots of sort of tailorability. If you are a developer team and you just want to get work done, Compose is pretty good for that. So, maybe we could just show an example of how that might work.
Yeah, cool.
So the first thing you have to do is you have to get a context. And in Docker, we can do Docker context. And this is the context I have. So I have an ACI context, which it happens to be in ACI West. I have an AWS context. So about a couple weeks ago, we announced the same thing for ECS, and so I can deploy either to ACI or to AWS. And then I have this default context, which it's starred because it's my current context. And what that is my local Docker, right? So if I do Docker run, let's do.
What's he going to choose, Redis or Nginx? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I'm going to choose Nginx if I can actually type it. We're going to go to Hub. We're going to go download it. It's up and running. So now I should be able to go to. Oops, I don't want you. 1 second. Getting the browser up. There we go. Let's go to localhost 8000. So, right, that's very simple.
There it is.
And let's do that exact same thing, but now do Docker context, use, I'm going to use ACI West, and now I'm going to do, well, I can, so if I do this, you're going to get an error. And that's because right now we don't support port mapping, but we can just do 80, and that's part of the beta. Yeah, we'll get that resolved as the beta goes on. You'll notice that it's a slightly different experience for the getting started, but in the end, you don't see the container pull basically. And it takes a little bit longer for the container to start. Let's see.
But it's relatively quick.
21 seconds for the start. And now we can go to, let's get another. Let me just do really quick. So Docker context, use ACI West, Docker PS. So we have the container running, it's running Nginx, and here's the IP address. So if we go to this and put in this IP address, we have the same thing running. So it's really around use the same tools and send it somewhere else. So I just sent the same container to basically 2 different places, and all I did was switch context. So I want to do this locally, or I want to do this in AWS.
Yeah, super cool.
So this is this is the first of the pieces for this. If we go to GitHub, so let's go to GitHub, Docker. We're going to go to the ACI integration. So if you hit something, please let us know. It also talks a little bit more about how to do it, and we do have a Linux installation. So you can also, if you're on Linux, you can go get this and learn how to install it. I'm still echoing. Let's see. So YouTube is off. I don't have anything there. Why am I echoing? Let's see. So, all right, chat. We're gonna live troubleshoot this. So I'm on Skype sending you that. I think the only thing I'm sending you is my voice. I think I at least didn't think I was setting up Skype to do anything else. But let me see what else is in.
It might be on my side, chat. Can you hear me?
Hold on 1 second, chat. What?
Can you hear me okay, Chad? Oh. Uh-oh. We might have just lost him. Well, it looks like we just lost Chad in the Skype. Of course. We said right before we got on, all right, well, let's see what could go wrong. What could possibly go wrong? We were thinking more of the demo, but So maybe I will pick up from where Chad left off. And so let me get my screen set up. And let me share. Okay, cool. So if you guys went through, I posted a blog post Monday on deploying your images up into ACI. So let's take a look. Let's see if I can, let's go here. We'll go into Safari. And so if you go to docker.com blog, and if you look at how to deploy containers, so this is the blog post that I wrote. If you want to follow along, you can, go up here. Let me throw this into the chat, and so there's the blog post. And you can see it basically walked down through logging into Azure, setting up your ACI context, all those type of things. So I'm going to walk through that now and show you a little bit of the integration. So let me jump over to the console. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to do a Docker login, and we're going to do an Azure. And so what that'll do is pull up the browser window. It gives me a login screen. If you don't have an account, you'll be able to create a free account, those type of things. So let me choose my Docker account. And then this tells me, okay, you've been logged in. You can close this screen. So now once I've done that, I come back to my terminal, and you can see that I've been logged in. I can't remember if I have a context set up already. So let's list out the context. So I don't. So what Chad was talking about before, you can think of a context of a way to point your local Docker engine. A context is basically somewhere where you can run containers. And it's a little bit of a loose definition right now, because we're starting to think about it not only local engine, but an engine on Azure and ACI, or some other cloud provider, or internally, in your own data center. And so basically a Docker context is the ability to be able to point to another engine. And so right here you can see I have a default engine type Moby, and that'll just point to my local Docker instance. So I can do Docker PS. Say I don't have anything running. Let's take a look at what images I have. Okay. So now what I could do is set up a Docker context, and let's take a look at the help. So Docker context, I can create one. I can inspect and list, remove, show, all the usual suspects here. And if we take a look at our so right here, listing, and then we can create one called ACI. So let me clear my screen. So Docker context create ACI. Oops, and you have to name it. Sorry, let's show the help real quick. So you have to give it a context, which is the name. And then you can pass in resource groups, subscription IDs, the location. If you don't, and what I'm going to show now is you'll get an interactive, the ability, Docker CLI will ask you questions. We'll go into interactive mode. So if we go to Docker context, create ACI, and let's call it my ACI. And it's going to ask me, what do you want? And so first thing it looks at is it finds my subscription. So you can have multiple subscriptions. I only have one. I'm logged in, so it uses that one. And then it's going to look for a resource group. I have a couple of resource groups here. I could choose one of those just by hitting down arrows, up arrows, or I can create a new one. So if you don't have a resource group created, if you choose this option, it'll create one for you. Let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new one. So it set up a resource group for me here, and we can see it's Bay. Ooh, I like that. So let's list out. Now we can list out our contexts, and you'll see you can still use the. You've got to be able to spell Docker. Context. You can also do an ls, same thing. So you can see I still have my default, which is the one I talked about earlier, and now I have a new one. Type is ACI, and you can see here the Bay that was the same resource group that was created up here. Okay, cool. So now we have our resource group set up. our context setup. And so let's switch to use that context. It's my ACI. And now if I do a Docker context ls, you can see that the star is now pointing to my ACI. So it's clear. So it's through Docker PS. So now what this is doing when I'm doing a Docker PS, now my context is switched and is pointing into ACI. It's going out and looking at ACI. That's why you saw that little bit of delay, and I don't have anything running. So I'm currently sitting in this little application called Timestamper. And let's take a look at the source. So it's a very simple Python app. We have a Docker Compose file, which is right here. And we'll come back to this in a minute. But then we have a Dockerfile. So Dockerfile is very, very straightforward Dockerfile using Python, setting up our working directory, copying on our requirements into app. We're running pip to install things. And then here we copy our source code in, setting up our entry point, and then running the command, right? Pretty straightforward, little pretty simple Docker file. And so let's use that. Let's build our image. So we can do a Docker, let me show you this. So if I do a Docker build here, let's give it a tag and we'll just say test. And I need to move into app. And well, it's telling me the same thing. I should read the error messages before I move on. But so it's telling me the command build is not available for the current context ACI, right? So let's switch back to our context, and we'll go back to the default. We got to do a use. All right. So now we can do a Docker build, and that should be fine. It's building it locally, building our image. But one of the really cool, powerful things, if you look at earlier, Chad was showing how he just ran a single container. He pointed at the context in the ACI, and he ran Nginx up on ACI. That was just with one container. But with this app, I want to be able to show how you can run using Compose. So if we take a look at our Compose file, we have our services, and then we have a front end, and we have a back end. In our front end, we tell it to build in the app, because in our app directory, that's where our Docker file is located. And then here, I'm going to give it an image name. We'll come back to this in a second. And then I expose port 5000, and I tell it, you depend on the back end. So wait for the back end to start up before you start up the front end. And then our back end is just made up of a Redis database. And so a very kind of straightforward Compose file. So what I'm going to do is here you need to change and point to your hub Docker ID. So if I come into hub.docker ID, hub.docker.com, and you can see I'm using pmckey. So this is your Docker ID located up here at the top. Let me log out. And you use your Docker ID. You can create one here right on hub.docker.com, or you can sign in with this button or this button. I will use the fancy dancy finger. And there we go. I'm in pmckey. So that's why I changed this to pmckey. Before it was just saying username. So what that's going to do is ACI will connect into Hub and will pull your images from Hub. So I'm going to build my image, and then I'm going to push it up into Hub, and then I'm going to run the application on ACI. But before I do that, let's save that. Let's run it locally. So what context am I on? So you can see I'm on the default context. So there we go. There's our compose. So let's just do a Docker compose. We'll do an up, and I'm going to give it a -- build to tell it to build my images and then bring everything up running. While that's building, let me look at the questions here. Chad likes to hear his own voice. Probably. But he's not that type of guy. I don't think so. Yeah, Twitch. Yeah, we've been thinking about Twitch for a bit. All right. So we built the image, and it's up and running. You can see we're listening on port 5000. So let's go ahead and open up my trusty Brave browser. So localhost 5000. And there we go. There's the application running. If you look at the terminal, you can see we have a get with a 200, and then we get a 404 because we don't have a fave icon. So let's run it a couple times. Timestamp. You can see in the console I'm getting requests. Okay. So did a Control C to bring that down. Let's do a Docker compose down. Okay. So we ran that locally, no problem. Built the image, no problem. So I'm going to do a Docker compose push. I'm going to push my image, my pMcKey timestamper up in the hub, and give that a second to complete. Okay. And now I'm going to switch over to use my ACI context. So Docker context, use my ACI. So there we go. So Docker context, ls. Again, you can see the star. We're pointing right there. And so now what we should be able to do is do Docker compose up and spin our application up into ACI. So let's do that now. Docker compose up. And you can see it's running 0 of 1. So timestamper has been created. And now it's creating the two instances, front end to back end. These names, if you saw Chad when he did his quick little demo, it was some random name when he ran one container. That's because he didn't name his container, so ACI will choose a random name. Just like when you run Docker run local, if you don't give it a name, it'll randomly choose a name for your container. But with compose, it looks at your directory, your folder that you're working in, and you can see here ours is timestamper. So it'll use that as the container service. And then it looks at each of the services inside of your compose file. And we have front end and back end. So that's how they're being named using a compose file when I didn't give it a name. But with Docker compose, you can give it a project name. I think it's actually on Docker compose up. Let me clear this so you can see it a little bit better. Yeah, so when you do a Docker compose up, you can give it a -p or a -- project name and give it a string. And that will be the name. Instead of timestamper, you can change that. Timestamper, again, being the folder that I'm currently in. So you can pass in the project name that you want to use in ACI. Okay, cool. So we were up and running. So let's do a Docker PS. And there we go. We can see our two images are running, our two containers. And here's the container ID, front end, timestamper back end. So let's grab this IP address, and you can see the port mapping worked here. So come back. Now this is local. We should get an error. There we go. So let's open up a new one. And now we're going to that IP address that I grabbed out of PS. And there we are. We're up and running. And we're getting timestamps. So super simple, very easily. Just to review what I did real quick. I'll get to the questions in a minute. Give me 1 second. But just to review real quick. So at the very beginning, I logged into Azure. So I did a Docker login, Azure. Now logging into Azure has been integrated right into our Docker login. So you don't have to download the Azure CLI. As you can see, I'm pretty sure it's AZ. I don't even have that installed. So you do a Docker login and give it Azure. That'll open up your browser, allow you to log in, and then we'll tell the CLI, give your credentials. And then we set up a context. So we did a context create, and we gave it the type of ACI, and then we named it my ACI. After that, we were able to list out our contexts and talked about the default context that comes with your desktop install. And then you can see the star is always pointing to the context that you're working on. And then we switched back to default. We spun the application up locally, made sure it was working. We build our images. We push those images up into Hub. And then we switched back into using the ACI context and did a Docker space compose up to run in ACI. And again, we're up and running pretty smoothly. You can also do so Docker PS. Now you can see I'm pointing up into ACI in the cloud. So if I did a Docker context, got to be able to type, use defaults, and then in Docker PS we don't see anything running. You can also do you can give Docker command. You can pass the context to it. So my ACI, then do a PS. So even though now my default, the context I'm currently using is default, if you pass a -- context into Docker, the root command Docker, and give it what context you want to use, then anything after that will be applied to that context. So it gives it a quick little shortcut. If you were in one context and you want to peek over to another real quick without switching, you can use the -- context. So let's move back. Docker context. Use my ACI. Okay, Docker PS. And there we go. Let me take a look at see if there's any questions. So what's the best practice for hosting your application in Docker? Do you recommend copying the app inside during the build step or create a volume at runtime via compose? Not exactly sure what you're asking there, but yeah, I would copy your application into your image and then only use volumes for persistent data. That's for if you're running in an environment, in a cloud, a public cloud, private cloud, and you want that up and running all the time. Local development is a little bit different. That's where you can use, you can mount a volume, mount your local file system, and have your container up and running, but still pointing at your file system where you're editing your files, and those will be reflected in your container. So if you're kind of doing live development, let's say with Node, and you have NodeMon running inside of your container, and it's watching a volume, a mounted volume, but it's on your local machine. Anytime you change a file there, it'll be reflected inside of the container. So you can do you can develop inside of your container. But for when you're running in a production mode or in a staging mode, something like that, copy those files into your image and run your application inside of the container, and then use volumes for persisting data. Hopefully that answered your question. How do you manage your logs? Are they persistent? They're persistent inside of the container while you're running, but once you stop everything, they're gone. You can use different tools in production to pipe those logs, standard in, standard out, standard error. Best practices when you're running in containers, you want to a couple years when you're not running inside of containers, you're usually you're logging to a file, and you might have multiple files. You might have a standard out and an error file. Now when you run in containers, kind of the best practice is you want to pipe out to the standard out and standard error. And then you want to have another process, a mechanism of reading those in and piping those into some kind of log stash or some other logging tool outside of your application in your cluster, and you can watch the logs there. So that it's a little bit of a problem if you're taking, I hate to say legacy, but if you're moving an application from kind of a standalone running on a VM by itself and putting it into a container. When you're running on that VM, you might have been piping your logs into an actual file and rolling those log files and collecting them and processing them later. You could still do that, and you can use volumes to write to those logs and then pull those over. That might be an intermediate step. But I would suggest think deeply about writing just the standard out, and then you can pipe and stream those logs wherever you need to. Cool. Okay, so let's see what else is in the blog post. So I just want to maybe go through a couple other things here. So sorry for the fast scrolling. But again, run down through this blog post. Reach out to me on Twitter, P McKee, if you got any questions. Love to help. But this should walk you through everything. But we wanted to show it live today. Yeah. Okay. So let's do logs. So let's see what context we're using, because I forget. Okay. So we're on ACI. So Docker PS. Everything is running still. So you can do Docker logs. And let's do timestamper _ front end. So there's our front end logs. Sorry for that. Let me come over here. Let's hit this a couple times. And I'll come back, run logs again, and we can see more. We can also follow the logs. Let me clear. So now we're following them. And I come over, get send a couple more timestamps, and you'll see those logs being pumped out. We can also look at our backend. So you can see it's our Redis database, and we're ready to accept connections. Let's see if we get some logs pumped out. Not sure what level of logging I have with the Redis, but you can see there. If I had more debugging logging on, those transactions would be pumped out here. So yeah, so very simple. So let's take it down. Let's go Docker compose down. That will tear everything down, stop my images. Now if we do a Docker PS, it's not running anymore. And there's some commands that not all commands make sense, not all flags make sense. So one of them is the -a. Right now, when you either stop or remove your container in ACI, I'm sorry, not stop. You either start or remove your container. We don't have this concept right now stopping them, as far as I know. Not 100% sure if that's coming, but yeah, let's see what else. Again, you can't list your images, so doing a Docker images, as you can see, it's currently not available in this context, which kind of makes sense. But all other kind of commands are very, very simple. So again, let me do the Docker. So let's go in. Let me start it back up. I'm going to do a Docker compose up. Let's see how quickly this goes. Trying to get the seconds here. Make this a little better. Let's see what happens if I do that. There we go. We can see Chad's in the chat. Hi, Chad. Not sure what happened. Okay, cool. So it took about 25 seconds. So let's jump over into, let's go into Azure. And let's look at my accounts. Well, I need to sign in. Okay, going into the portal. And then let's take a look at we can see the resource groups. Let's go look there because I created a new resource group when we started. Give it a sec. Okay. So I believe we created this one, this BAE. So if you click on that, you can go and see all everything that's associated with your resource group. Let's go back into home. Let's take a look at our container instances. So you can see we have timestamper running. It tells us it's in this resource group. So if you look at container instances, you can see you can view your CPU and memory and network info, all those type of things. And then we can come over here and take a look at our containers. And you can see we have a front end, back end, and then we also have this ACI DNS sidecar. This is used for DNS. Obviously, it has the DNS in it. But here's our two images. And you can see here that the front end image is coming from pmckey/timestamper. That's my hub account, right? This is my hub namespace, and this is the image name. And so this is together, that's called a repository. So it's pulling that image out of the hub repository, which is pretty cool. So I just pushed up in the hub, spun up my containers in the ACI, and they pulled those down. And then we see we have our backend running. So pretty cool, pretty simple. That's kind of a whirlwind tour of ACI, but let's see if we have any questions. Yeah, so Chad hit my the answer there. So yeah, there's no concept of stopping in ACI right now. All right, so I don't see any more. Please put in your questions if you have any. Chad's there to answer. I'm there to answer. Let me know. Also, too, we're going to be doing a getting started AMA as a live stream. I'll come in so you can see my face a little bit better. So there's Chad frozen in time. Sorry, Chad. It's a good side. It's a good side though. Anyway, so we're going to be planning on doing an AMA. Ask me anything, ask Chad anything, and we really want to kind of focus that on the getting started. So there's a lot of folks that are new to Docker. There's a getting started where you come and run a little hello world tutorial, and you kind of get the concepts of a Dockerfile, compose file, how to create an image, how to run an image in a container, run containers, start and stop, those type of things. And then the challenge is, okay, now I want to take my application and I want to containerize it. And that's where a lot of the beginner questions come out. What base image do I use? What exactly is the difference between an image and a container? How many processes should I run inside of a container? Should I run my database inside of a container? How do I do that? How do I connect my application to my database running locally? So you get into some networking questions. How do I persist data? How do I map in my development files into my running container? So all those kind of, I hate to say basic because they're not basic. All those foundational questions we want to address to help people come up to speed as quickly as possible. So look for that. Keep an eye on our Twitter channel. Follow me and Chad on Twitter, and we will tweet out, when we're going to go live for that. We're going live every Thursday at 10 p.m. Pacific time, noon Central time, and 1 o'clock Eastern time. But and these are, these will then be hosted on YouTube, so you can go back and watch them again in case you missed anything. But yeah, so look for that to be coming. Think of your questions. Tweet me some questions. Tweet Chad some questions. Show up in the live chat. Ask any questions you have there. Let me go look in the live chat now. Yeah, how to make persistent volumes. Yeah, that's always a great question. I think we'll actually do a live stream on that. It's a little bit more in depth to answer in a couple minutes. But basically you have to, you can have Docker manage your volumes, and Docker will take care of where that data is stored. And you can use plugins on the different cloud providers to be able to put those into a persistent store in Azure or AWS. Running locally, though, if you want to persist your data, I use volumes locally. And so when I spin up a Mongo database running locally, I just have its data being stored in a volume, and then I connect with my different applications into that database, and I always have that volume. So when I start and stop my containers, I always connect into that volume, so the volume persists that way, and I let Docker take care of it. A lot of times when I'm doing local development on, let's say, Node.js, I'll mount my local file system. Instead of letting Docker manage the volume, I'll mount my local file system where my source code is at. And so that way, when I make changes to a source file, it's reflected inside the running container. Up in the public clouds or even your private clouds, it gets a little more complex than that. But I think it's a good topic. A lot of people ask about that. Let's see. Is Google Cloud integration in the roadmap? I think that's a great addition, David. You should add to our roadmap. And that is in, if you go to GitHub, I'll dump the link into the chat here. So it's GitHub, basically Docker roadmap. So please put an issue in our roadmap. And that'll get prioritized. Just reading questions. Oh, sorry, Chad. I just saw you put the roadmap. It's hard to read chat as they're flying by, and seeing which ones Chad answered or not. Awesome. Let's see what else I could talk about around this. Getting a swarm question, but I'm not sure. Rahit's not sure exactly what you're asking. Why you should use Swarm? Swarm is great. Swarm is has moved to the Mirantis side, and where they're supporting that, keeping it up and running. So we focus back more on the development experience and helping you get your code from your desktop, working dev environment up into a cloud, whether it's public or private. And that could be into a Swarm cluster, that could be in a Kubernetes cluster, that could be in ACI, ECS, whatever it is. We're really focusing on helping you get into those clouds, helping you run your code as simple as possible. All right. So just let me see if we have any more questions coming through. Let me just do again a really quick recap. And so, okay. So the first thing I did was a Docker login, Azure, to log into Azure. And then I created a context, and I pointed my Docker engine up into the cloud, ACI. And you can also run, and to see what context you have, is a context ls or a list. All right, and you can also, now we're pointing at ACI. You can see that here. And I could do a Docker run, -p80:80, -- name, web, and nginx. And now you can see spinning up the web, spinning up a single container. And let's see if we can get done before 20 seconds. $15. Oh no. Let's hope my prediction would go quicker. But there we go, 21. Relatively quick for spinning all that up into, actually it's pretty darn quick, spinning everything up into ACI and getting it running. Let's come over here, make this a little bit bigger so y'all can see. Sorry for the fast moving around of screens. Good enough. Again, pointing out ACI, so let me do a Docker PS. And there we go. We have our timestamper app still running, and now we have a container named web, and it's running on 20.185.9715, and it's running on port 80. So there's our Nginx. Spun up a container very fast, 20 seconds into ACI. So let's do docker remove web. Docker PS. Okay, not running anymore. Let's test that. It's gone. So that quick, spun up an Nginx server in ACI and brought it back down. Single container using just standard docker run, docker remove. And then we also have integrated in with Compose. So you can see I'm in the root of the directory here. I have a docker compose. Let's go down. Why down? Because let's do a PS real quick. Look at our processes running. You can see I have timestamper already running. So let's tear that down. Do docker down. Whoops, docker compose down. Oh no, I'm not sharing my screen. Lovely. Newbie streamer mistake. Who was that? Who's it? Thanks, Alex. Terribly sorry. Okay, let me run through that again then. So first thing we did was the Docker login Azure. Opens up the website. I click login. It tells me, yep, you've logged in. You can close this window. If we come back to the console, you can see I'm logged in. We can look at our context. I already have an ACI context set up, but let's do another one real quick. So I do Docker context create. And let me give it a help here so I can show you. So it creates an Azure container instance. So you can do from host. You can do a bunch of flags here. So didn't want to show all that. So let's do Docker context create ACI, and I'm going to say, let's just call it ACI. I have a couple resource groups already. I'm going to choose one that I already have available. If you want to create a new one, just choose that. Obviously, up and down arrows. And there we go. So now I'm using that resource group context ls. Now I have two ACI contexts. So I could, in theory, point at two resource groups. I could use one for my stage, one for development, and then one into production. All right. So we could have a local resource group that everybody on the development team is kind of using and starting up in containers. You can have your own that you're just using to show. Say you're working on a nice little feature, you wanted to share it with the PM real quick. You can spin your container up on ACI in your own resource, have him or her look at it, tear it down very quickly. So created a context, and then you set what context you want to use by doing a Docker context use. Let's use ACI. Now I'm using that context. I know that because I can do a Docker context ls, and we see this star. It's pointing to the new one I just created. And then I could do a Docker PS, nothing isn't running. Do a Docker run. 80:80, we'll do our infamous Nginx. Give it a web 2 and Nginx. Didn't like that because it's not, it's the name. There we go. So again, spinning it up. Should take about 20 seconds. Okay, good, Alex. You can see. Sorry about that. Yeah, Carl. You can tweet either at Chad or me. My handle is P McKee. The letter P and then MCKEE. Chad, drop your Twitter handle in here. Mine is P McKee. Chad, I forget yours. Forgive me. But yeah, tweet us some questions. Love to hear from you. And then also, if you jump on live and ask a question, we'll address them also. Again, these first AMAs we want to do is keep it more for getting started, more of the foundational issues. So thank you, David. Put an issue on the roadmap. Excellent. Okay, so we're up and running with our Nginx. Oh. Docker PS. There C is our Web 2. Let's take a look at the logs. Docker logs Web 2. There we go. You can also follow those. So now we're following. Let me grab this port or this IP. There we go. And there you go. You see the logs being piped out. Awesome. So Docker remove. Let's clear my screen. So again, we can run the standard Docker commands. Docker remove Web 2. And there we go. It has been stopped and removed. And there we go. We get not even a 404. Can't even find it. Awesome. And then real quickly, let me just show in case some folks joined a little bit later. How to make static IPs in ACI. You know what? I'm not 100% sure. I don't believe we're supporting that right now. So I'm in the root of this project, and you see I have a Docker compose file. Let me open up the source so you can see a compose file. We have a front end and a back end service. Our front end going to use the app directory of the build because that's where our Docker file is located. When it builds it, the image that will be produced is pmckey/timestamper. And we're going to map the ports 5000, and then we tell it, wait for the backend to start up before you start up. And then our backend service is just a Redis database. All right. Dockerfile, again, is very straightforward. Using Python 3.7 Alpine, setting our working directory, copying our requirements file in, running pip to install everything, copying the source code in, setting up our entry point, and what command we want to use. Very basic Dockerfile, but very solid Dockerfile. And so let's run that local. So I'm going to switch my context to use the default. So Docker context ls. We're using the default. I'm going to do a docker-compose. I'm going to give it a --build to make sure we build the images. They've already been built, so it spins up pretty quickly. Let's go into local host 5000, and there we go. As you can see, we're running here. There's my requests. Pull that down. Let me do a Docker compose down. All right. Now let's just switch our context. Docker context let's use ACI, and then let's do a Docker compose up. That'll look again. Defaults to docker-compose.yaml. Looks in that file. Uses our directory timestamp for the container instances, and then has individual instances here, back end and front end, based on the compose file, the services we have inside of the compose file. So we're done. Let's do a Docker PS. And there we go. There's our running containers. 224 on port 5000. Whoop. And there we are, running ACI. We get our timestamps. Boom. Awesome. Let's see what kind of questions we got coming in here. Thank you for putting issues on the roadmap. Appreciate it. I'm not sure if you can expose more than one port right now using ACI. I'm going to go, I'll look into that. I do not believe so right now. You know, we're kind of still in beta, so there's some early bits, but features are coming quickly. I'll check on that. I'm not 100% sure. You can map using compose other ports. So you saw how I just ran port 5000 here, and I did that in my compose file. I just exposed the port 5000 and mapped it to 5000. All right. Let's see what else we have in here. Awesome. Okay. Well, again, sorry for the little bit of technical difficulties. Last week it was my machine. This week it might have been Chad's. Hopefully I didn't hang up on him. Forgive me, Chad, if I did. Awesome. But yeah, we're going to do this a lot more regularly on Thursdays here at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So please join us every Thursday on the YouTube channel. Get it live streamed. Come ask your questions. Please give us topics you'd like to hear. But yeah, looking forward to doing more of these. This is fun. Love the interaction. I appreciate everybody showing up, listening to me ramble on a little bit, switch madly between screens. But yeah, I hope it was fun for you guys. Stay tuned. More to come. We'll be back on next week. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.